So welcome to Space for Faith. I'm your host, Matt, and I have two guests with me today, Rick Nelson and Phill Wright, who are the authors of Return from Rysa, correct? Or was it Return to Rysa?
From.
Return from Rysa, that's what I thought. So to get started, let me tell you guys kind of where I'm coming from and how I got interested in your books. And then we could have the conversation, and I'll try to be brief because I'd like to hear from you. But and let me just start by thanking you both so much for your time. I'm very excited to talk to you and very interested in this topic. And I'm also very interested to try to figure out what I consider to be some of the mysteries surrounding this topic. But so I've been interested in the UFO topic pretty much my whole life. I'm not an experiencer of any kind, although I would say that, the experience that I've had would be that my wife and I, after we started watching the show The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, after the first or second season, when we were driving past Vernal, Utah, we stopped at the front gate, and we actually, we had like our cell phones did some glitchy things, and then we kind of drove around the southern part of the ranch, and then drove around the north side, and my wife spotted first before I did a white circle in the sky. It could have honestly been a weather balloon. You know what I mean? Because I know they've released some at sometimes, but this was after the first season had aired, and so I don't know if they had released one that day, but something was up there, and to be honest, it seemed like it was moving against the clouds. But I can't say what it was, but I certainly, I've that's the experience that I've had. But for some reason, I've always been interested in this topic, and so much so that I didn't even realize. I recently reacquainted myself with an elementary school friend, and that was one of the things that he said he remembered most about me, is that I was interested in this topic even way back when I was in elementary school. But for most of my life, as I've done school and other, you do life every day, right? But it's just kind of always been a side interest, and I've read various books about it. But obviously, since 2017, when the New York Times published the article by Ralph Blumenthal and Leslie Kean about the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program and Lou Elizondo, things have changed a lot. Where before I used to wonder, like, are people just lying when they claim to have these experiences? What is really going on? What are people seeing now? Between that and The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch and other things that I've read, I'm pretty much assured that something's happening. And I still just sometimes I feel like, well, it fits really well into our framework as members of the church, because we believe that the Father through the Son created worlds without number. And so, but then as I've had conversations about this with some of my family and friends, they've pointed out, I think my brother pointed out that it seems like somewhere in the scriptures it also says that the only people that have ministered to this world are those who have belonged to it or will belong to it. And so he uses that as sort of an argument that, well, people from other worlds may not be able to visit this planet. And so anyway, going to Phenomicon, I don't remember if it was the first year, because I've been there several times now and have really enjoyed it. But the year that you guys were there, since you're here, and I'll tell you, you had a really great background that you brought with you, that the cover art, but you had the, like the pull down like canvas behind you, and it was very eye catching, and I just felt I was just really interested in your booth, and Phill, I went to your presentation, and I was really impressed, and I was also, and I'll say I was very impressed that you so boldly testified of Jesus Christ in front of an audience that, obviously we weren't in like a state conference or something. And I admired that. But, so anyway, I read your books, and to be honest, the first book there were times I remember when I was at Phenomicon and you were introducing your book, you or someone else said, like, it's not for kids. And I read the book and I was like, yeah, this is not for children. There's some kind of disturbing, things in there that I wouldn't, that it, make me think, like, man, is this kind of thing really happening to children? And anyway, it's just kind of a eye-opening book. I really enjoyed it. I thought that you did just a fantastic job of not only suggesting some very interesting ideas about how maybe the universe is, but also making it a very compelling and interesting story. And to be honest, I think there was almost some like 1970s or 80s style uh, campy comic like portions. Like for instance, at the end of the first book, when the big warship that is disabled by one of the Ryzen warriors, and you kind of have this moment where like I can't remember the name of the villain and I'm sorry, but it's almost like he gets angry and his ship goes flying off, and it was very visual in my mind, and I thought it was great. So I'm really excited to talk to you, but I'll be honest that part of it's not just that I'm interested in talking about the book, but I'm more interested in the ideas that you've shared and kind of where you have come to these ideas. And so maybe if it's okay, we'll start with Rick, and I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about yourself. I've been communicating with Phill, and I saw him present at Phenomicon, but I haven't had any interaction with you until today. Can you tell us a little bit about like how did you come to be involved with this, and what's your sort of background about interest in this topic?
Sure. So I'm probably actually the perfect person to answer this question because I am a lot like your family. I've known Phill for 30 years, and we've had some interesting conversations over the early years about some things that he had heard about and people that he knew and experiences that he recorded and shared. And my assessment was, well, I believe he believes it, and I know and love him, so I trust him. I just didn't know how to reconcile that with the idea that I just didn't think God would allow um, his other creations to come here and interfere in any way. I
Mm.
just couldn't wrap my mind around that, so I just inherently just just didn't accept it. So if I'd say for most of my adult life, I'm a huge science fiction fan, and I've read everything. I've got probably 2,000 books in my library, and three or 400 of them are science fiction. And I grew up on all the great writers, and I've always believed that science fiction gives you a tremendous way to teach the gospel without teaching the gospel.
Mm.
And many times the authors don't know they're teaching the gospel. It's almost like it proves to me that the Lord has a sense of humor.
Hmm.
And some of the people he uses to teach these important principles. But a few years ago, I mean, we'd kicked around. It'd be fun to write a book together at some point, and then and well, I'll be a little vague about this, but Phill and I end up having spent 10 hours with some of the greatest people on the planet. Just awesome, awesome spiritual giants, and some of whom you probably read some of their books. But in the course of that conversation, we realized that wouldn't it be cool if we could write a parable that talked about God's interaction with his children across the universe and be able to have them tell a story that maybe our kids and our posterity would find interesting, and maybe they would believe it if it came from a fictional, half fictional character with a different perspective on the eternity. So we took on this project, and then just to address briefly a couple of things you've already mentioned, it is true that among others that God showed Moses the great vision, right? He saw, if not everything, he saw a lot.
Hmm.
And he did say that he would limit going forward just stuff that pertained to this planet, because that was really all he needed to worry about. And he did infer that people didn't minister to this planet unless they were part of this planet. Um, So I'm not disputing any of those things, and I believed it and taught that all my life. What's not said, that's inferred by many, that I think is incorrect, is he didn't state that he would limit agency for others that had the capacity to come here. That's not the same thing. Okay.
Yeah,
So we've
good point.
seen, and now we're going to date this podcast, but we saw some tremendous things happen in the Middle East today. Um, Probably a third of the planet would love to go to the Holy Land or to Mecca, right?
Right.
And in many cases, it's their life goal. Well, one thing that we've learned, even though it's fairly veiled in the scriptures, is that Jesus Christ is the savior of all of the Father's creations, not just this planet. So here we are, we're being taught about the atonement, something happened in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago, and we're supposed to believe it. One thing harder than that is to be Lehi's family and to believe in an atonement that's going to happen 600 years in the future in the same place, or maybe a place called Rysa, which is just an example of a planet that God created. And those people have to believe that the Son of God would be born on a planet called Earth in the Milky Way galaxy on the fringe towards the, that's inconsequential solar system, and that he would there, do the atonement. So you talk about exercising faith and the interest of and understanding. So part of our project in writing this was to tell a story from their perspective, how they would accept the Son of God and believe in him, and the fact that they would maybe know a lot more about our planet than we know about our planet,
Mm-hmm.
especially if they were one of the early creations. And when time has no meaning, I don't know what early means versus late, but one of the early creations, and they've had thousands of years of existence and anticipating not only the birth, ministry, death, resurrection, atoning sacrifice of the Savior, but then his eventual return in glory, because all of God's creations are tied to that event, which is something that's taught very clearly. It's very interesting. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, Matt, but
Yeah, thank you.
that's kind of how I got involved. And I would say about 5 years ago, I went from thinking, yeah, I believe Phill believes it, to realizing that there's so much evidence. There's
Mm-hmm.
there's incredible evidence, and it's obviously there's something going on, and it's significant. It is massive. There are millions of eyewitness accounts,
Yeah.
and we just can't blow it off. It's just silly. I realize it's not. You can get it put into a loony bin, a loony club, if you believe this stuff. But the bottom line is millions of people have experienced things firsthand, and so we've had a lot of fun accounting for maybe at least some of those events, and having a chance to preach the gospel of
Yeah.
Jesus Christ using a parable format, relying on events that are either literally happened or symbolically happened that are credible, and
Yeah.
telling the story. So
Well, thank you. And yeah, I agree with you that, I feel like the evidence at this point for there being something is occurring in our reality that the documentation, I think, is just, overwhelming at this point based on what I've read. I mean, Leslie Kane wrote a book called UFOs, Generals, something Go on Record, and very, well-researched book. And she describes all the different encounters people have had where not only have people had eyewitness reports, but it's been corroborated by radar and other intelligence gathering devices. And then we had the Nimitz encounter that, so it's like there's something going on. I'm interested to try to figure it out. And I think that the parable that you and Phill have proposed has a lot of interesting possibilities. Phill, would you tell us kind of about how you came about, this topic? And
I First of all, thanks, Matt, for having us on. This is great. And I've been on several podcasts and I've spoken at a lot of events, but not with Rick. So this is so cool to be with the co-author of Return from Rysa on your podcast. So thanks for inviting both of us. You mentioned early on when you went to the Phenomenon event that I spoke at. One of the things that Rick mentioned this, that we really wanted to be able to do was to bring two groups of people together. And that's on one side, you've got the Christians who believe in Jesus Christ, and we're part of them. On the other side, you have the UFO or the alien believers who don't believe in Christ, and they believe that somehow aliens came here and seeded our planet and over billions of years created what is us. And we wanted to find a way to bring these two groups together to help them discover where their common ground is. And the common ground is real simple. There's one creator, that's our Father in heaven, through his Son, Jesus Christ, as Rick mentioned, who created worlds without number. And when I was a kid, I went to a Protestant church. I'm a convert to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And one of the things that the minister would teach there is that God created this earth, and that's where he put his children. Nowhere else, just this earth. And I always struggled with that as a kid. I'm thinking that's pretty arrogant to think that you can limit God's ability just because you think he only created one earth, and that's the only place with all of the universe that he put his children. So it always bothered me that there was that mentality out there that somehow the only people in the universe are on this little blue marble, and that God didn't have the ability or the wherewithal to even think to put people somewhere else amidst the vast creations that he's created. So being able to go to conferences, and I've spoken at several conferences, and as you mentioned, I spoke about Jesus Christ. I was the only person speaking at these conferences who talked about God and Jesus Christ. But I'm so glad I had the opportunity because I had many wonderful experiences with people after my presentation who would come up to me and say things like, "Thank you for helping me remember God. Thank you for helping me to put it together to accept that, yes, there is a God and he did create me, and he also created these beings on other worlds." And that was our goal. One of our goals in the first place was to help people understand that God created the universe through his son, Jesus Christ, and he populated it, not every planet, but he populated those specific planets with his children, and he gave them the same plan of salvation and the same agency that you and I have. And if we could tell a story from the perspective of someone on another planet who understands the gospel the way we do, then Rick and I had found a way to kind of help some of our children who've gone off another path to remember who they are and how important they are to their Father in heaven, and that we're not just some speck of life on a planet that doesn't matter. We're part of a grand plan. And that's what the book Return from Rysa is about. It's about teaching that there is a grand plan. And it's been fun to tell a story primarily from the viewpoint of this group of people on Rysa, the Rysans, who understand the gospel the way we do, and they have come to this earth and with specific assignments, one of which is not to minister to the earth. But the caveat there, as you've read the first two books, is that we also had a lot of fun being able to introduce the location of the lost 10 tribes by claiming that the Lord took them off of the earth, just like he did the city of Enoch and the people of Salem, and who knows how many other pieces of land the Lord at some point in time may have taken off the earth to put those people somewhere else until he brought them back. So in Return from Rysa, what we talk about is how the lost 10 tribes, a piece of earth was taken and it was placed on a terrestrial world, which happens to be Rysa. And there, those people, the lost tribes, have been nurtured. They've become a righteous people in preparation for the great day according to our scripture, when they would return and essentially save our part of the world from the Antichrist. As mentioned throughout the scriptures, even Joseph Smith, Doctrine and Covenants church history talks about the return of the lost 10 tribes. So we included that in Return from Rysa. And the great part is Return from Rysa, the whole setup is it's the lost 10 tribes returning from Rysa. And this young boy by the name of Connor, the book starts when he's about 3 or 4. He's abducted by some not so good aliens. Then God gives him 3 little wonderful angels, like guardian angels. And you discover in the book that these are people that haven't been born yet, but they have a mission prior to their earth life to help this little boy discover God. So even though he's being abducted by aliens, he's also learning that there's a true and loving God. And that's helping him through this process of dealing with beings from another world. We had a bit of a challenge in book 1 because we were introducing so many new and unique concepts to the reader, including new characters, that was a real challenge putting book 1 together. But by the time you got to book 2, and you probably noticed this, Matthew, book 2 flowed really well because we'd already established the world building, the characters, the basic plot.
Yeah.
And we're excited, hopefully, to release book 3 before the end of the year would be great.
That would be great. I'm looking forward to it. I will excitedly read it once it's published. Well, thank you both for those responses. And I'm not trying to put you on the spot too much. I recognize it can be kind of scary to share, your deepest beliefs, but I do wonder if you guys would be willing to answer just a couple of questions. One would be, what are your thoughts about the lost 10 tribes? Do you think the way you presented it in your book is the reality, or do you, because I feel like growing up in the church, one of the ways that it would be presented is that they're just scattered among us. You know what I mean? And that the gathering occurs through people joining the church. And to be honest, that never sounded fun to me. You know what I mean? That just sounds kind of, I don't know. It doesn't excite my imagination.
The Articles of Faith make it clear that there's 2 events, the gathering and the return. I mean, we know that there is a gathering going on, but we also know there's a restoration. There are 2 things, and there's a comma between those 2 statements in the Articles of Faith. It's not just one event. And when I explain to people, they'll say, well, wait a minute. We've discovered through patriarchal blessings that there are representatives from all of the tribes on the earth. How can that be if they've been taken somewhere else? And my explanation is real simple. When the saints were forced out of Nauvoo, they went to Utah. Did the entire group go to Utah? No. A lot of them stayed there. A lot of them stayed along the way in different places. They scattered. They didn't all follow the leader for various reasons. And that's just human nature. You'll find that with every major exodus ever encountered in the world, probably with the exception of Moses, because those who scattered died in the desert. But I'm just saying, everywhere else, there are groups that just stay behind or stay somewhere else. So to me, that's the logical explanation as to why there are small groups, small pieces of people here and there. And the other thing is, if the scriptures talk about how when the lost tribes return, they will bring their riches and their treasures, their scripture, their prophets. Well, wait a minute, if they're scattered, where are these prophets? Who's keeping their scripture? Mm-hmm. So sometimes as members of the church, we put these blinders on and we don't want to look past what we understand or think we know. But the reality is, we know that there are 2 events. There's a gathering that's been going on. We're gathering the best we can, and there's a restoration. So yeah, I firmly believe the lost tribes are not lost. The Lord says they're not lost unto me. I know where I have taken them. And I believe he's taken them somewhere else. In our book, we use the name Rysa. It doesn't matter. But no, I don't believe they're on the earth. I believe when they come back, as Joseph Smith talked about, their return will be more momentous and greater than the parting of the Red Sea. The entire earth will recognize when they come back.
Mhm.
So, no, they're not going to start walking from the North Pole in sandals carrying sticks and bow and arrows.
Mhm.
That may be impressive for someone to walk that far, but it's surely not going to gather the attention of the entire world.
Mhm.
I might amplify that if you don't mind as well. So the the first major event that occurred would have been right before the Assyrian captivity. So Matt, think for a second. So if you're a righteous follower of God, of Jehovah, and you've got prophets warning that if you don't repent, that you're going to be destroyed by the Assyrians, what are you going to do? Well, I think I'm going to Jerusalem, right?
Oh, yeah.
And the fact that Laban shows up in Jerusalem with the brass plates, or the record of Joseph, the record of the Northern Kingdom, tells us that. My guess is that all 12 tribes were well represented in Jerusalem
Mhm.
by the time of the Assyrian captivity. Now, when Babylon, and I'll come back to Syria in a second, when Babylon came and took Jerusalem, destroyed the city, destroyed the temple, etc., and some were scattered all over, some were taken back to Babylon. From there, they were scattered. At that point, you would have had all the tribes scattered like crazy. Okay.
Mhm.
Um, so I've had people say, well, there's three possibilities on the 10 tribes. A, they've all been scattered and they'll be gathered in through missionary work. B, they're under the North Pole or Hollow Earth or whatever. Or C, they're off planet. Actually, the answer is yes. So are they scattered? Of course they're scattered. There's members of all the tribes that are scattered. Um, is there a chance? Is it possible there's some pockets of them that are on this earth that the Lord has preserved and kept hidden? Um, I think that's possible. Uh, there's one tremendous book that has a very wide following. It talks about one example of a group that were found and brought back to help establish, Zion, New Jerusalem. And then the third element would be: is there a group that would take off planet? And um, Phill and I are absolutely convinced that that is the case. I don't know how else to explain the 10th article of faith and to explain the very graphic account of how the 10 tribes come from the north. So, um, I wish people would open their minds a little bit. Something else that's really interesting to me about this is that Peter said that as it was in the days of Noah, so it would be at the time of the second coming.
Mhm.
So what was it like in the days of Noah?
Wicked.
It was really wicked. But what was part of the wickedness that was going on? It was from all accounts, prophetical accounts, and some allusions in Genesis. There was stuff going on, right? It shouldn't have been happening. Phill is a huge Star Trek fan, and the prime directive, right, is the number one rule of number one law. And let's just say the prime directive was violated handily, and war was introduced. All kinds of things were introduced, and the consequences to those that were a party to that were really awful. So there's a pattern there, and that's probably beyond the scope of what we're talking about today. But it's worthwhile to do some digging. For people can look at that in their own time. But
Well,
it's not an either or proposition, right, Matt? It's
yeah, and
certainly they were scattered. Are there some pockets of people around the planet? Possibly. Don't know. Can't say. Is there a group off planet? I'm absolutely convinced. Joseph Smith said they were. The early saints believed it. If you go look at their early journals, it's just so clear. And then it. I just have to shake my head at here we are studying Doctrine and Covenants this year, and so many of the things that are being discussed that's causing controversy. All you have to do is just read the history of the church by Joseph Smith. actually read what he wrote. And it is so clear what actually happened. And ignore the philosophers, ignore the philosophy of mingled scripture, ignore our version of the scribes and Pharisees,
Mm.
and rely on the words of the prophets. It's just, for some reason, it's hard for us to see what Moses saw and to see what Joseph saw, even though we think we're so smart and so enlightened and so advanced.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And you touched on some things and you mentioned maybe they're out of scope, but they're absolutely not. I think that, you know, what you're referring to, you're probably alluding to like the Book of Enoch, and some of the teachings in the Book of Enoch and about what was going on with Noah and the people. But I want to address kind of what you're saying about our perspective, because I agree with you. And that's kind of been the point of my podcast, is because I perceive there as being potentially a conflict between a worldview that one might have growing up in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and what I perceive as being actual reality. That's kind of what I want to touch on in my thoughts and actually solve for myself too, because there have been times where I've learned things about things that we don't talk about at church, like UFOs or the paranormal, and I've had difficulty reconciling it with the paradigm that I had growing up. And yet I feel like this, I appreciate what you gentlemen have said about your goal with writing the book, because there has to be a bridge between the two paradigms. Otherwise, some people are going to have severe ontological shock when some of these things occur, to the point that it may challenge their faith rather than promote their faith. And so, as you're saying, and I agree with you, that I wish people would kind of look into this more, because I think, like, why don't we talk about some of these things more or get more in depth, and I recognize that, our goal is to testify of Christ and help people create a relationship with Jesus Christ. And, but then I just wonder if there's room for more explicitly saying some things, but I just like, it's like you say, you bring some of this up with some people and they're just going to be like, oh my gosh, like, what is he talking about?
But Matt, doesn't it seem strange, Matt, of all the Christian churches on the earth, I'll say of all the churches on the earth, there's only one church on the earth that I know of that not only believes in worlds without number, but when you attend the temple, it teaches about worlds without number.
Mm-hmm.
There's no question God put children on other planets. We know
Mm-hmm.
that.
Yeah.
Especially if you've gone to the temple, you know that.
Yeah.
But yet it's something that, because it's not something that we talk about in general conference, so many members of the church, again, put on these blinders and they're afraid to even talk about those things when it's a basic part of our doctrine, creating worlds without number.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to go any deeper into that, but those who are listening or watch your podcast that happen to be members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints know what I'm alluding to when I say we believe in worlds without number, continuous creation. So
Mm-hmm.
it is somewhat frustrating to me as a member of this church when I come across other members who will not accept the possibility that people from another world could actually come here, much less have the desire, as Rick referred to it, to visit the Holy Land, the holy planet where it all took place, but will totally ignore the possibility that people could come here. I'm not talking about people with weird horns or green faces or reptilian. I'm not talking about that. I can step back and say God can create anything he wants. If you look at some of the strange bugs and creatures on our planet, they're the most alien looking things you can imagine. Could he have created some that are larger that look like you and me? I'm fine with that. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about people like you and me and Rick, people who are created in the express image of God, um, who have the gospel in their lives. What better way to testify of Jesus Christ than to have someone from another world come here and say, hey, guess what?
Mm-hmm.
There is a Christ and he was born on your planet, and I love him even though I've never met him. This is my first time to come to your planet because I've wanted to go to the holy planet my whole life, and now I have the technology and the wherewithal to do it. Why should that sound crazy or wild to a member of our church?
Mm-hmm.
To me, it's the most logical reason why beings from other worlds, people from other worlds would want to come here. But as Rick said, because we have agency, there's not only good, but there's bad. I don't have a problem with the fact that evil beings could have technology that might be more advanced than ours and that they could come here and create problems or issues. Gee, there's a information throughout the ages. Back in the 1300s, I think, in Germany, there's a famous painting of these alien ships that came out of the sky and had this battle in the sky. And there's this, I can't think of what it is, but there's this famous German painting of this little town that witnessed this battle of these spaceships.
Mm-hmm.
Where did they come from? And they knew nothing about anything flying in the sky that's motorized because there was nothing like that back then. And now we have all kinds of whistleblowers in the federal government, as military, non-military, that are testifying before Congress that they
Mm-hmm.
have seen and witnessed technology that is not of this world. We've had so many of those things already in our broadcast worldwide from our US Congress that it still blows my mind to think that there are people who don't believe that we've been visited by beings from other worlds. To
Yeah.
me, it's a given. If you
Yeah.
don't believe that, then you're not paying attention to what's happening in the news, or you
Yeah.
don't believe any of the news. That's just amazing to me.
Yeah. Rick, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, it's this is fun and it's
Yeah.
good
Well, let
and
me ask you this.
yeah, go ahead.
How do you both think that we talk, like the UFO world talks about the topic of disclosure as being the point at which we are finally told the truth by the government. My question for you is, do you feel like there will be an admission on the part of the government, or do you think, let's say that the 10 tribes are restored and that's a process by which they come back basically guns blazing, so to speak? I mean, they, like in a very, very awe-inspiring display of their power. Like, how will this process of disclosure happen, in your opinion? Do you think we'll ever get the truth from the government, or?
Sorry, Rick, I'm going to jump in.
Yeah.
No. Look, we have A1 Atlas right now. I wasn't going to bring this up, but my goodness, our every astronomer with any credibility in the world has been watching this thing for the last 60 or 90 days.
Mm-hmm.
They called it a comet, and the closer it got towards our to our planets, the more they realize this is not acting like a comet. It doesn't have a tail. It's giving off nickel instead of nickel and iron. That's never happened before. It reflects light in a way that it's a solid flat surface, and it's hot on one side and cold on the other. It's changing colors. The scans are showing that it's hollow on the inside. Look, there's so much evidence right now that we have something very unique coming right into our soul. It's in our solar system now. It's going past
Mm-hmm.
Mars. And scientists have been so intrigued by this for the last 2 months. And guess what happens when it gets right in front of Mars with the Mars rover, which took some silly pictures? You've got a rover on a planet looking up into the sky. It makes no sense when you have craft around Mars from NASA. You have satellites that have the best imaging technology ever created floating around Mars. And you explain to me why suddenly everything went dark. Everything went dark with NASA with the European Space Agency, with all of these international agencies, all at the same time, they went dark as soon as that object is within our view. Now, if that to me is the most obvious sign that no government is going to disclose something, either because they're afraid we're going to freak out, and I don't buy that one, or they don't want us to know what they're learning for political or power reasons or whatever. But there's no doubt in my mind that's not just some rock floating through space at 150,000 miles per hour. It's not an asteroid. It's not acting like an asteroid. It's something very, very different. And for whatever reason, now that we can look at it, we're not seeing any images at all.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not the only person obviously talking about this. There are very prominent astronomers who are very frustrated that suddenly everything went black with the government. So no, I don't think the government will ever completely disclose things. But the time will come when it won't matter. We won't need the government to disclose what we see in our own skies. And that's why, when Joseph Smith says the return of the lost tribes, which we talk about coming back on the ships of Chittim, it's going to be such a miraculous event that, no, we're not going to wait for the nightly news to tell us what we just saw. We're going to witness what we're seeing. Mm-hmm. And we're going to know how real it actually is.
Mm-hmm.
Let me take this in a little bit different direction. We'll see if you edit this out, which is fine. It's your prerogative. So early into the process of writing this book, I remember asking Phill, all right, so where do you think the 10 tribes went? Did they join Enoch? And we kind of thought about that for a while, and then Phill came back and said, no, they are somewhere else. And I said, where? And I won't get into details on this one, but Rysa was when this term was coined as a result of that conversation. So when we originally wrote the first book, early in the first manuscript, we were treating what we call Chittim, because that's a term that's used in the Old Testament. We named the place where the 10 tribes resided as Chittim, and we treat it like a game preserve. And we described it as being about the size of Australia. But I'm thinking 2 or 3 months into the process, we were having a conversation, and the question was asked. I don't remember if I brought it up or Phill. It doesn't matter because of how our process worked. But we realized we had a real problem. And the problem was that how do you put telestial people on a terrestrial planet? That we knew that wouldn't work. That didn't work. So how did that happen? And through some really remarkable experiences, we realized that during the flood, a piece of the earth was removed and was placed. When we say a piece of earth, we're talking about a continent the size of Australia, the atmosphere around it, the fresh water on it, the ocean around it, the life, everything in that sphere, all applying with telestial law. This is telestial property, telestial land, telestial animal, plant, fish, fowl, was literally taken by the Lord and placed on Rysa. So the Lord knew well in advance that he'd prepared a spot of ground to plant this group of people. It's interesting, John saw this. He talks about it in Revelations. Isaiah saw it. Nephi saw it. Those three are the most plain if you don't look at Apocrypha. If you look at Apocrypha, then there's all kinds of accounts. And then things kind of clicked in for us, and we realized that, okay, so the Lord prepared that for them, and when the time is right, he took a small, struggling group of people that survived all these trials and tribulations as they journeyed north from Assyria. He took them and placed them there and protected them from Satan, just like is described in the book of Revelations, and allowed them to grow and to develop. And Satan hates the house of Israel. Matt, I mean, I know you know that. He hates the house of Israel. He hates the noble and great ones. His mission is to destroy us.
Mm.
And for the Lord to take an element and to hold in reserve for his use in the last days is a tremendous thing. So that just, for what it's worth, this was, the Lord sees the end from the beginning. He knows what he's doing. And in my opinion, for what it's worth, which isn't a lot, this is what I think will happen. And then I want you to think about how the world will respond to what I'm about to describe. So if you have a group of ships called the ships of Chittim that appear on the planet, and you have war going on, and they're here, fighting the beast, fighting the Antichrist, with the sole purpose of freeing the followers of God. And I'm talking about Christians and good people of all denominations that are willing to sacrifice their life for their testimony of Jesus Christ. Satan hates all those, and we will have to stick together, and I believe we will stick together. Now, that's kind of like the advance guard. This earth will be restored as it was, before the fall. That's taught in our hymn book. It's taught in our scriptures, which means that piece of ground has got to come back. The way that I read the Doctrine and Covenants is that piece of ground will end up in the Arctic, up north in the Arctic, in North Pole. Just like a lot of people theorize that when the city of Enoch returns, it will be in the Gulf of Mexico. It seems to make sense that that's where it came from. Elijah Snow wrote a hymn that was in the hymn book for decades that talks about the fact that this earth is roughly a fourth of its original size. That over the millennia, pieces of it have been taken off. If you get into the universal model, which I don't know if you've heard of that, Matt, if you haven't, you need to look at this. It is phenomenal. This is what should be taught at BYU. This is what should be taught in our science. It's incredible stuff. If you look at the universal model and how the earth was created, you could, all the physics makes sense. But so what's happening to the earth when they see this asteroid, quote unquote, approaching on a collision course that is the size of Australia? The media will be calling it a cataclysmic event that will destroy the planet, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you kind of referred to this earlier, and I kind of let it sit for a minute, but a big part of what we're trying to do here is that we are ill prepared for what's coming. It is so crazy, it is so outside of our paradigm that we can't even wrap our minds around it. And what we're hoping is that people can see truly. And when it happens, they will not only not be panicked, but they'll be able to soothe and calm their families and their neighbors and their friends. God is in control. Cool stuff is going to happen. President Nelson has prophesied that time and again. Really, 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 really bad stuff's going to happen before that, which makes it necessary for the good stuff to happen for the rescue. So anyway, for on the fringe crazies, you can put me there as I talk about what one series of events that I think will likely happen that will cause the world to go totally and completely out of their minds.
Well, yeah, and as you said, a piece of land that size, headed towards the Earth would definitely make people extremely uncomfortable.
We have to land quietly or slowly and nicely. It can't just bang against the Earth, or we're all going to be gone.
Yeah.
Enoch is going to be even a bigger event, but the way that I read that, I think that's going to happen, towards the very end. Last will be first will be last. And at that point, we won't be worried about it. We'll be just happy. We'll be looking forward to their coming, and we'll celebrate their arrival. So,
yeah. And just as a side note, it makes me think of the way people respond, I think of the book, and I wish I was better at remembering names, and I apologize, but there was a science fiction book that I read years ago, and you guys will probably remember. And the idea was that there was, I think, 5 different suns, and this planet orbited, and so essentially the planet always had light, but there was a group of people that said, that darkness was coming, and the way the orbit was, every several thousand years, there was like a time of darkness when they would actually see the stars in the heaven and the dark sky, and people just would lose their minds over it. I mean, literally like instant just loss of touch with reality. And I wonder if, like you said, with people being ill prepared, if that would be a similar thing that will occur in the future, where people it'll just be such a shock and awe type of a situation that people will not know how to respond, and they just have no. It'll be like reality's ripped out from under their feet, and but it's anyway. So it's interesting. So I wonder what your thoughts are then. One of the biggest things that has always, I think, troubled me, or has been one of the things that has been most concerning to me about this topic, would be the alien abduction, which in your book, Connor experiences this from a very young age. And so you have the stereotypical gray alien species that seems to be doing a lot of this type of activities. And I'm operating the assumption that it's actually happening in reality for people, because, after reading books about it and so forth, and I think of like John Mack, the Harvard researcher that, spent years studying this, and felt like there was like the scenarios that people portray are consistent enough that it seems like something's happening. I wonder if you guys would address the question of, do you think these scenarios really occur of alien abduction, that the stereotypical grays are really involved? And I guess just start with that. Like, do you think that's a real thing?
So let me take this first, and then Phill I'll probably cover 10%, and I'll do the rest. First of all, Connor is a composite figure. So Connor's life is a composite of many people that we have talked to, primarily Phill has talked to. So his experience, his life, is their recollection of what happened. Now, is there room for error, human memory, etc.? Of course there is, especially this kind of trauma. But this is a parable, right? I mean, do we know the name of the priest that ignored the man waylaid on the side of the road? Do we know the name of the Good Samaritan? Do we know, other than they're going to Jericho, we don't know any of that stuff, and it doesn't matter, right? Because that's not the point. So to me, it's irrefutable, but like you just said, that these events occurred. The thing I wanted to address, and then Phill can talk about his firsthand accounts of what he has observed and, from talking to people, etc. One of the things that we discovered in writing this book and our research is that agency is very much involved, and that world leaders are up to their necks in this thing. There's no way that God would have allowed this to occur if not for the exercise of agency and our leaders selling us out. And before we're shocked at thinking that world leaders would be willing to trade blood for treasure, or for knowledge, or for technology, don't forget that even the United States of America, that they did above-air nuclear testing in Nevada. Tens of thousands of citizens were indirectly impacted, died of cancer, et cetera, et cetera. But we also placed military personnel in harm's way on purpose so we could test and see what happened. It's a horrible, horrible event in our history. And I'm not trying to to defend it or say it's okay, but we were facing obliteration. And I kind of at least get the fact that there was an element that said that we can risk a few to save the many. So did this happen? Absolutely. What's really dark about this now is that whether or not aliens are still doing this, which I think is debatable, or how much of it's happening is maybe debatable. What is not open to debate is that human trafficking is enormous. That the rich and powerful are harvesting organ, they're harvesting adrenaline, they're harvesting all kinds of things to continue to extend their lives. They're doing it for money, they're doing it for drugs. And we're talking millions of children are being abused. In fact, our primary editor for book 3 asked us to go back and do some rewrite because she didn't think that we'd address that topic strong enough. Mm. Look what happened to anyone that took on the cartels and how quickly they silenced them and destroyed it. I'm not going to mention any names because I don't want to get dragged into politics there, but there's a very powerful group of people that are very much profiting. And I think the quote was, you sell drugs, you make a profit once. You sell humans or you sell human services, you make a profit every day. So it's horrific. And I guarantee that God is not happy. And there's a huge price about to be paid. And the Savior himself said those that would do this had been better if they had never been born. Mm-hmm. And they'll still have been hung around their neck and they're thrown in the depths of the sea. So part of our mission is to shine a spotlight on this activity. And as awful and horrible as it is, and the representations of quote the Greys unquote doing this, it's even more reprehensible to think that our own people are doing this to our.
That's a great point.
So anyway, with that, I'll pass the baton to Phill because he really is one of the leading experts in the world on this subject.
Well, when you say that, Rick, I don't know what to say. I just want to add, Matthew, when you asked the question about do you think that it's really happening, or alien abductions happening, primarily the little Greys or whatever, I think of was it Travis Walton in 1975 who happened to be a member of our church? He and 4 or 5 other young guys in their 18 to 20s were loggers in New Mexico, Arizona, somewhere in the Southwest. And he was abducted by a UFO, and all of his friends watched it happen. You're familiar with the story, right?
Yeah.
They all watched this ship come down. They were yelling at him to stay away, but he runs towards the center of this open area where this ship comes down. A light comes down, it yanks him up. They all freak out. They run away. And he's gone for 3 days?
It was a 5
days.
They
can't find him anywhere. There's a search party. And then 3 days later, he shows up, completely in shock, tells them what happened. Nobody believes him. They think he's nuts. They think he's crazy. Unfortunately, it destroyed this man's life. It destroyed his membership in the church because those ecclesiastical leaders wouldn't believe him. And yet he had these other guys that were witnesses to some strange craft coming down and taking this man up in the sky. So it's very frustrating to me when we know of experiences like that. And by the way, none of these men have ever denied that event. None of them. But someone like Travis Walton, I believe, he ended up leaving the church over the next few years because he could not deal with the fact of how can there be a God and little green aliens doing this to me? And how come nobody in my church believes me or supports me in this? So I think about that story. And there are so many other stories that have more than one witness to what happened to them. the couple in the early 60s,
Betty and Barney Hill.
Betty and Barney Hill, one of the most famous. And they went through lie detectors. They went through all kinds of stuff to prove their story. And these two had no reason to make something like that up, but they could never prove it was wrong. So the frustration that I've had over the years is that when something unexplainable happens to people, if members of the church can't explain it, or government officials or law enforcement can't explain it, they either put it on a shelf and ignore it, or they immediately say, you've made the whole thing up. So it makes me sick to think of how many people, because yes, I do in fact believe without a doubt that beings from other worlds have come here and probably continue to come here and interfere and take our people, whether they're taking them temporarily or taking them permanently. It doesn't matter. But yes, I believe it happens because of agency. God allows bad things to happen to good people. It's always been that way from the moment Cain slew Abel. So we've got to take these blinders off and stop acting like these things cannot and do not happen, because the reality is they can and they do happen. And so many people, their lives are destroyed when they tell people their story, or people never tell their story and they destroy their own lives because they have nobody to talk to about it and they can't wrap their head around it. So I'm very passionate about this because of what I just said. I think it's terrible, especially members of our church who cannot accept the possibility that this could happen or that this does happen. I don't know, I don't remember the number, but I think it's somewhere around 100,000 people every year disappear in the United States. I think the number is 200,000. They find 100 of them, but about 100,000 are never found again. Never. Where are they going? And the interesting thing is, you know where most of them disappear? In our federal parks, in the mountains, out in the wilderness, in the middle of nowhere. They just disappear and they never find them. Now, it's not that they can't find people, because they have search parties all the time and they'll find dead people or things that have happened, but the vast majority are never found again. What happened to them? Where did they go? Why is it so hard for us to consider the possibility that maybe they were taken? Maybe they were taken. I had no interest, and Rick will know this, I had no interest in writing a book where I would say, hey, these are my life experiences. These are things that happened to me. I didn't want to do that. The main reason I didn't want to do something like that is because I wouldn't want to be branded as a Travis Walton or someone else, regardless of whether it happened or not. I didn't want to write anything like that and say, hey, this is me, I'm Connor. So we didn't want to do that. But the more people who read this book, they always ask the question, who's who in the story? And like Rick said, we wrote this as a parable. We called it a parable based on true events. Well, every parable is based on true events, or you wouldn't believe it. You have to have a frame of reference. But it doesn't matter who it happened to. It doesn't matter if we know the name of the prodigal son, his dad, his brother, sister. None of that matters. What matters is the message. What is the message? And the message, again, that we want people to know from reading Return from Rysa, it's not about Rysa. It's not about the Luzon. It's not about the Lost Tribes. The message is simple. We have a Father in heaven who created an amazing plan of salvation that he gave to all of his children everywhere. And then he ordained his son, Jesus Christ, to be the physical creator of the universe, creating all of these worlds without number and placing many of our Father in heaven's children on those worlds. And I believe allowing them to interact within their own technology with other worlds. So I don't have any question. There's no doubt in my mind that we've had people from other worlds come to this planet. Most of them are probably benevolent. They probably worship the same Jesus we do, and they just want to be here. But some of them are not benevolent because they have agency. So, yeah, some of them can do some pretty bad things. They can take people, they can hurt people, they can keep people. God allows agency everywhere. So, I guess that's kind of my answer as to how I feel about it personally. And I think a lot of people have moments in their life when they question, did something happen to me? I'm not going to say everybody's been abducted because I don't believe that. Neither do I believe everyone has seen a UFO, but a lot of people have. And, that would be a fun conversation for another podcast. I could tell an incredible story where 24 people I know, and I was one of them, witnessed this incredible event at an LDS church building. So those are my thoughts on it. And I hope that people who watch this episode can have their minds open just a little bit, especially if they're members of our church, that they can go back to the scriptures, they can go back to the basics of the gospel and not be fearful of the possibility of these things happening. It should be a natural expectation in the plan of salvation.
Mhm. Thank you. How are you doing on time?
We've been talking for quite a while.
Mhm.
It's up to you, Rick. I kind of scheduled out my evening for this, so it's up to you, Rick.
I have some flexibility. I am concerned about our audience and not wearing them out, but I loved how Phil's kind of summarized Laura's testimony, and I would just like to, second that. We're going to see, as President Nelson has said, the most incredible events in the history of this planet. That says a lot. Okay. And we're just trying to make a small contribution to help our brothers and sisters not be totally blindsided by this, and to realize that Christ is so incredible. Not only is he the savior and the creator of this planet, but he is God's agent throughout the universe. And what he has done is just so incredible. And we're grateful to be able to minister to his children in a small way and share what little bit we've learned. And I'm sure that we have our share of mistakes, and there's probably stuff in our books that is a lot closer to fiction than reality, and that's part of the fun. But the parable is real, and what's about to happen is real. You talked about Khan in one of your podcasts, Return of the Gods. It is one of the finest books I've ever read, and it's just interesting to me that a classically trained Jewish scholar turned Christian sees so clearly what no one wants to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Is doing the unique brand of missionary work, inoculating Christians against the world and these crazy and nonsensical worship of the planet stuff that's going on. There's other wonderful authors, and I'll just take a second to say, we've been heavily influenced by Michael Rush.
Mm-hmm.
The stuff that he has written is remarkable. And he's a CPA that's brilliant, that just has a regular life, right? And in his spare time, he wrote some books and trying to figure out stuff. And with the invitation for us to try and figure out stuff. And so that's a place. And then, of course, the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. There's so many great stories, so many great parables out there that are trying to teach the nature of God, the nature of his children, the relationship we have with each other. And I'm grateful that I had the privilege to work with Phill on this project. And thanks, Matt, for spending some time with us. And if there's a compelling question or two that you think your readers want, or your listeners want to hear, I got some more time. I just don't want to abuse their time.
Well, thank you. And I just have a couple and you actually answered one of them. I was going to ask you, aside from the scriptures, what books you would suggest people read, maybe to help strengthen their faith in Christ and expand their understanding. And you mentioned Michael B. Rush, and I agree with you that his book,
A Remnant Shall Return.
A Remnant Shall Return. Thank you. Very interesting book. And you read through it, and it's like, this makes a lot of sense. And he has a lot of scriptures to support it, and I agree. It's a great book. And then you mentioned The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And do you have any others that you think of off the top of your head? And then I want to hear from Phill and see what books he would recommend.
Oh, Forward the Foundation, Asimov. It's the reason why I mentioned that one is we're talking, man, this is almost 75 years ago. But he describes, I think, our world. What's happened at that point, for those that haven't read it, the series, is that technology's evolved to a point to where they no longer have the ability to even maintain and service their technology. Partly because nobody wants to work anymore. Partly because the politically become very autocratic. Any original thought is discouraged. And so what they do is the main characters, they essentially create a place to store all of human knowledge because they know what's coming, and there's a place, after they all destroy each other, there'll be a way for them to get their knowledge back. But I look around and I see a situation where because we've turned our back on God, because we kicked him out of the classroom, we kicked him out of the schools, because we kicked him out of polite conversation, out of polite society. And now I had a friend tell me yesterday that if he wears a crucifix or any kind of Christian symbol and we're not even talking about a MAGA hat, we're talking about anything that says that I believe in God, would literally put his life at risk in an area of a major city where he lives. And it's just, so yeah, this, growing up, reading the Book of Mormon, I couldn't visualize how the Nephites went from this incredible civilization to what Mormon and Moroni described as a civilization totally rotted from the inside out and did the most horrific, evil, terrible things to each other. Looking around, I can see how that happened. And it happens when man becomes God and there is no God, and you penalize people physically, economically, maybe even with their life if they bear witness of the divinity of God and Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm. We
are closer to that day than I would have ever thought possible, and it's amazing how quickly it's happening. And of course, the other book I'd recommend is The Tipping Point, which says, as opposed to how we normally look at things, saying that things happen gradually, the book teaches very fundamentally that once you reach a certain point, the tipping point, once you pass that point, things accelerate exponentially, good or bad. And so yeah, there's tons, but those come to mind.
Great.
So the question was, which books have influenced you? Was that your question, Matt?
Or just, in thinking about helping strengthen faith in Jesus Christ and also opening people's horizons, aside from the scriptures and of course, aside from the books that you gentlemen have written, are there books that you would recommend people read?
Let me add one more. I forgot. The Heavenly Man.
The Heavenly Man. Okay.
Have you not read that?
No.
You've got,
Amazing,
but I will look
amazing.
into it.
you've got to read it. Or listen to it on Audible. It's the rise of Christianity in China through the home church. The Chinese government tried to prescribe through Protestant and Catholic means an authorized Christian approach. These people, they bucked that, and they taught the gospel of Christ at huge peril. And I'll stop there. It is one of the most remarkable books that I've ever read. And of course, Viktor Frankl, his experience about man's search for meaning.
Mhm.
I'll stop. I could keep going, but I really will stop this time.
Well, I am going to say Rick took a couple of books that I would have listed too. There's another book by James L. Thompson called Worlds Without Number, and James has become a pretty good friend of mine. Um, he's a member of the church, and in this particular book, and I believe you can get it at Deseret Book, he basically interviews members of the church. It's a very extensive book who've had experiences, extraterrestrial experiences, but it's a wonderful book. Um, and I truly enjoyed reading that book. I don't sit around and read alien books. I really don't. As a matter of fact, I never have until we started writing this series. I was never interested in fantasy fiction. I was interested in science fiction. Rick mentioned a while ago I'm a Star Trek fan. I've always been a Star Trek fan, but not really a Star Wars fan, sorry, but I just never really got into Star Wars. I've primarily been more interested in religious books than fantasy fiction and stuff like that. I don't have a whole list of books off the top of my head. One of my favorite authors was Cleon Skousen, and I loved anything by Cleon Skousen. And I think my favorite book from Cleon Skousen was The Cleansing of America. Just an amazing book talking about the future, the past, the present, and our future. So I've really enjoyed religious books that have helped me understand and accept possibilities that we don't always think about. I mean, Cleon Skousen, he didn't have any issue at all with the lost tribes being somewhere else. He talked about it, I believe, in The Cleansing of America, that they were not on the earth. So when you've got an amazing LDS scholar like Cleon Skousen who says things like that, and what Rick didn't really mention is Michael Rush has become a dear friend to Rick and I, and he's had a huge influence on this series from the very beginning. And we still communicate with Michael. And of course, he's written three incredible books on the Book of Enoch. They're kind of hard to read because they're so detailed, and he goes into such in-depth research in writing the books, bringing things out that most of us hadn't thought as we've perused through the Book of Enoch. So I love everything I've read from Michael Rush. But there's so many great books and authors. And I think one of the biggest challenges that I have, look, Rick could probably read a book 10 times faster than I can. I tell people I'm a real-time reader. I read a book based on the timing of how the pacing is going. I have two sons that are speed readers that can read through a 500-page novel in a few hours, and to me, it's a few weeks. So I don't I don't give myself enough time to read as many books as I would like to read. Unlike Rick, who can zip through and read and remember everything so well. So no, I don't have a long list, but I do have a list. I can't think of it off the top of my head, just the few books I mentioned. But James L. Thompson did a wonderful job in his book, Worlds Without End. So I would recommend that to anybody.
Great. Well, thank you both very much for your time and for the books that you've written, which I think are engrossing, interesting, and faith promoting. I would absolutely say that I feel like my desire to be faithful to Jesus Christ increased after reading your books, which I know was, so mission accomplished in that respect. In fact, I for a while after reading the book, sometimes in my mind I referred to Jesus Christ as Mantikai. Is that what you know what I mean? And
That's what the Ryson refer to him, Mantikai, which means burst of light.
yeah, and it just became interchangeable in my brain. But anyway,
Now, just so you know, I would never tell people to call him Mantikai instead of Jesus. I wouldn't do that.
I wouldn't say,
But that's how the Rysons, that's the name they give for him. As you can imagine, every nationality has a different name, or culture has a different name for the Messiah. So, but anyway, I appreciate what you said, though.
But so thank you so much for your time. And I'm going to stop recording now, but I wonder if you guys would stay on for just an off the record question. And then I really, really thank you and appreciate each of you for making time this afternoon.
You bet. Thank you for having us on.
Thanks, man.